So you want to write a script. Where do you start? What is the format? Is there a specific way movies are told? What elements are there in a screenplay? How do I write dialogue? How descriptive should I be in the action? At this point, you probably turn to YouTube and books. A lot of books. After all, this is writing, so books should have the answers. Next, it's off to the bookstore, where you probably get Save the Cat and a few other books like it. Each one teaches you the process from planning to story structures and basic ways to tell a story. These books are great places to start, but for me they always felt a little too prescriptive, telling you exactly how to write a script or the untold rules behind good stories. Some of these ideas and patterns work for me and others don't. So I end up back here, staring down the blank page, unsure if anything I'm writing is even good. But then, out of the industry came a book that was exactly what I was looking for. It was well written, backed by experience, filled with examples, and not prescriptive. That book is Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman, aka the man behind such classics as The Princess Bride, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, All the President's Men, and many more. In other words, he is the real deal. So what does Mr. Goldman have to offer if he doesn't have patterns for you to follow in your story or writing habits that will just guarantee a masterpiece out of the gate? Well, he does have two rules, which we'll look at in the end, but before that, there is a lot to get through. If I'm completely honest, there is so much knowledge packed in this book that covering all of it neatly is far outside the scope of this video. But that being said, I'm going to do my best to generalize and cover my favorite moments. The book breaks itself down into 4 sections: Hollywood realities, adventures, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Da Vinci. For our purposes, I will be combining Adventures and Butch Cassidy into one large section because they covered generally the same idea. So now we have 3 sections. So let's go ahead and start with the first and most difficult to summarize. We often think of screenwriters as goblins sitting in their office or a coffee shop just madly typing away and ignoring everything else. Or maybe not goblins, but just as people generally detached from the rest of the filmmaking process. Most of their work, depending on the production, is done before all the flashy visual work, which means they often get left out of the glitz and glam. But that doesn't mean they are separate from everyone else or just connected to a few people or a few parts of the process, because at the end of the day, the script is the guide for everyone else until the film is released. The first section is entirely devoted to these connections that are often overlooked, to the screenwriter's place within Hollywood, and it covers everything from stars to LA to agents and then little tidbits on writing. Obviously, that's a wide range of material, so what I'm going to do is let you in on some of my favorite moments and let you go and discover your own favorite moments. And trust me, if you are serious about screenwriting, not just for fun, but as a career, this whole book is indispensable, but especially this first section. And I think I say that about the other ones too, but the whole book is great. So here are 3 of my favorite moments, quotes, and ideas from this first section. Firstly, there is his chapter devoted to directors. After 2 lengthy sections covering the ins and outs of stars and executives, their struggles, the screenwriter struggles with them, and personal anecdotes to reinforce these points, we land on 1 page devoted to directing. And I'll just go ahead and read it to you. Some of my best friends are directors. P.S. Everybody knows directors are important, and much of what follows directors appear constantly. Suffice it here to say that they are good and bad, helpful and subverting, envious and supportive. Whatever they are, I feel screenwriters must support them, because directors are under assault from all quarters at all times. Over the years, I have met and worked with a dozen prize-winning American directors. There is not one whose philosophy or worldview remotely interests me. The total amount of what they have to say cannot cover the bottom of even a small teacup. More on that later. That they can survive the sandhog-like physical demands of the job fills me with awe and admiration. The best of them are wonderful storytellers. And those best do one thing superbly well. They help everybody. It's obviously a bit of a joke how short this is, but it's also incredibly insightful and impactful. Both his chapter on directors and then his later chapter, which is much larger, on auteurism, are both brutally honest and simple. Directors are very important, and he obviously doesn't deny that here. But instead, he pulls the mask off and is honest that they are more figureheads than anything else. And this is something that I think we forget a lot in our modern discourse. Now with that fun but still insightful bit of information out of the way, let's get to some of the actual writing advice he has. Writing is hard, and it takes a lot of time, as many of you probably know. And I have had the bad habit of writing and editing simultaneously for a long time now. Somehow I managed to pass my undergraduate degree. I'm still not sure how. Instead of my typical overly detailed writing and editing approach, I know a lot of people who do the exact opposite. They jump into a script with a vague idea of the plot and sort of guess their way through it, hoping to solve all of its problems later in editing. But when editing comes around though, they realize it's going to be a full rewrite, not just tweaks. And what they do is therefore they do some touch-ups, but the script ends up lacking the power and precision it could have had with better planning. Of course, masterpieces can be written either way, but for me, I've been searching for a new way for a while, a middle ground between infinite planning and immediate writing. Goldman suggests that you write with as much speed as possible and even more deliberation. His reasoning is, I believe somehow, that extra energy translates itself into the page, and from there to the reader. To summarize his perspective, he says, "When someone asks how long it takes to write a screenplay, I'm never sure what to answer, because I don't think 4 weeks is what it took to do Butch. For me, 8 years is closer to the truth. In any case, before you begin, you must have everything clear in your head and you must be comfortable with the story you're trying to tell. Once you start writing, go like hell, but don't fire till you're ready." This is the middle ground I've been trying out since, and I will say it has been working wonderfully. I enter each scene with confidence and then leave it with a speed and simplicity that gives it power and makes editing easier. Of course, the form of research and deliberation will depend on the person and could look anything from a beat board to notes to an outline to a full prose version, but the clarity should always be there no matter what the process, so that you know when you sit down to write when and where to deliver that knockout blow to the audience. For my final favorite bit from this first section, he has a chapter entitled Believing Reality, in which he states the fact that movie reality and reality itself are not the same thing. And no matter how much we talk about bicycle thieves and neorealism, the fact of the matter is they still employ narrative and visual techniques to enhance and guide their stories. And to put pressure on anything other than real life to be realistic is nonsense. But I digress. The difference between film reality and reality is of course widely accepted now. But Goldman gives several excellent examples here that I think are worth mentioning, and there is one that demonstrates this point excellently, and it's a small heist story. In the first version of the story, we follow the typical heist movie format of planning, preparation, and execution. In the second, we follow a less conventional story as a man plans to rob somewhere and simply guesses/wanders his way to exactly where he needs to be. At every turn, things go exactly the way he needs them to, and it all becomes very unbelievable by the end. Yet, the unbelievable story was the true story. It's how Michael Fagan received his audience with the Queen of England. The real situation felt entirely unreal on the page, so what seems to be important in screenplays is a logical momentum and the ability to follow the story. As he puts it, truth is terrific, reality is even better, but believability is best of all. On to Section 2. Section 1 was all about the forces, people, places, and general screenwriting rules that screenwriters have to contend with, and Part 2 is the personal history of dealing with all of these things. How they were overcome, worked around, or just given up on. Goldman goes film by film through his career and explains his part in its making, what worked and what didn't. But what makes this part so special is the Butch Cassidy script. All the advice this book has to offer is great, as you've already seen, but Goldman recognizes that there is no substitute for practice. No matter how great the advice, you're never going to get better unless you actually do it. So Goldman gives us the entire script of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which just also happens to be one of the best ever written. It's really an amazing inclusion here that shows a true passion for the process and knowledge that reading scripts is the real key to improving as a screenwriter, rather than rules that promise to help you skip the stages of practice and failure. It gets even better though, as the script isn't just sitting on its own. It also comes with Goldman's own analysis and critiques. In other words, you don't get to just see a master's writing and then compare it to how it was adapted to the screen. You also get his intimate knowledge of what worked and what didn't. This is supposed to be an untouchable god-tier script, but of course it has flaws too, from being too cute to having too many reversals and so on. All these questions are ones most, if not all, screenwriters have to ask themselves at one point or another, and his guidance through this process shows us the proper way to approach our material and the material of others that we're helping. This whole chapter is, once again, invaluable, but perhaps my favorite little reminder comes at the end of the chapter. We're always told that good stories will win the day, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this isn't necessarily true. There's a lot of external factors that determine if/when a story will actually get made, and if it'll have an impact. And no matter how much writing teachers or screenwriting books want to tell you otherwise, this is the truth. A good story does not determine success. luck ultimately does. And this is the exact note Goldman hits at the end of this section. No matter how great all those pages were, how well researched it was, and how much he cared, Butch Cassidy's success and our own success depends entirely on luck, timing, call it what you will. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're serious about screenwriting or just any creative endeavor in general, it's an important and humbling reminder. Now, I'm not going to lie here. When I first saw the davinci header of this section, my previous experience with other screenwriting books had me a little concerned and worried. I half expected a section on the great abilities of a screenwriter to be a davinci, the guardian of a secret power and creativity. But oh boy, was I wrong, because this is yet another piece of amazing practical advice/work. In this final section, Goldman takes a short story he had forgotten he had written, I don't know how you do that, and adapts it into a screenplay. The short story is entitled Da Vinci, about a master barber who causes strife in a family when he outdoes the main character's father, the owner of the barbershop. This section demonstrates how to adapt a work to the screen and also the differences between screenwriting and then prose. The chapter starts off with the entire short story. Then Goldman moves on to all the questions that come up in adaptation. Next, we get the entire screenplay, so then we can see what it looks like in screen form. And then finally, we hear from actual professionals and how they react to it. I honestly don't want to spoil any of this section because it is a ride that needs to be experienced in its totality to truly grasp all the nuances it contains. What I can say is that this might even be better technical experience than section 2, because here it is all working forward rather than hindsight looking back at what could have been done. And with that, the book is done. But before I get to his 2 rules for screenwriting, I realized while writing this that there is actually a better way to categorize what makes this book so special. It takes left turns where your average screenwriting book or post or blog turns right. Sure, you will find practical advice and examples in these other screenwriting sources, but rarely has their advice been proven and backed by years of peak performance, not just general performance. Not only that, but this book doesn't backpat or praise creativity. It's realistic. Screenwriting is hard, and at the end of the day, it requires a business mindset, not a wholly creative one. Creativity is great only insofar as it actually gets seen and recognized, which usually requires capital, especially if it's a movie in an industry where millions of dollars are chump change. Next, Goldman doesn't just say to study scripts, but physically gives them to you and then walks through them with you. It's obvious that he has been where we are now and wants to actively help, for real. Rather than just tell you it'll all be fine if you just write great stories, whatever that means, or follow these rules and archetypes, which only sometimes work. In this book, Goldman is that bigger brother mentor that we all wish we had, and now we sort of do. Okay, by now you should be on Amazon buying this book. This exact copy is the one you're going to want to look for, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. But before you start reading, I have to give you the 2 rules he provides for screenwriting. And just like the rest of the book, these are not exactly what you would expect, sort of. His first rule is this: nobody knows anything, and his second rule is screenplays are structure. The first rule is basically to say that in Hollywood and film in general, it's nearly impossible to predict what will work and what won't, especially from the page to the screen. I don't know about you, but films like Gaspar Noé's Vortex work for me, despite their lack of a proper script. I think that script was like a 4-page outline. There's magic and talent and egos and weaknesses that can make a bad script sing and a great script flop. And of course, the audience just might not like the film at the end of the day. Once again, this sounds like a downer, but it is also reassuring because it shifts our mindset away from external validation to internal resolve and pride. Of course, you want your work to be well received, and sometimes it is, but you also shouldn't take those wins or losses too personally, because you aren't a genius and you're not a hack either. Now, you probably did see the second rule coming, screenplays are structure, as most of his other talking points have been practical rather than artistic, and it's still true. Some people get away with artistic scripts, and I see all of you in the comments trying to type and mention Tarantino, but the truth is that most likely will not be you, at least not out of the gate. Instead, you need to make sure that what you write is standard and efficient. Goldman uses the great analogy of carpentry, a craft more than an art, just like screenwriting. In this little analogy, he says that you could use the most beautiful wood and finishes to make a bookcase, but if it falls over, well, it isn't worth shit. You can have great moments, great characters, great dialogue, great prose, but if there isn't a guiding structure, a guiding push, a guiding format, then your words probably won't see the lights of a film set. Of course, there are non-narrative and non-commercial films that push at this boundary, many of which I love. And I can't speak for you, but I want packed theaters in my movies. I want them to get made with big budgets. And that's the type of writer he's speaking to here. So please, if you want to learn screenwriting, improve your skills, or maybe you're a professional just wanting some more inspiration and more thoughts and ideas, go get this book immediately and discover for yourself all the wisdom that it has to offer. And shout out to Shane Black and all the other panelists at Austin Film Fest last year that turned me onto this book, which I'm pretty certain a few of them referred to as the Screenwriting Bible, which is something I agree with. So yeah, don't just take my word for it. Take the words of Shane Black, one of the greatest living screenwriters and the director of the modern classic The Nice Guys. This is a must-read for any screenwriter. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day, and adios.